Can you believe that even in Catholic families, up to 90 million women suffer from physical abuse? Stay tuned. The struggles that we're going through in our world today is the reality of violence, violence against women, violence against men. We have a beautiful expert with us today. Thank you so much for coming and being with
Father,
us.
thank you.
God bless you.
Thank you very much.
Tell me a little bit before we get started. You're a psychologist who's working very strongly with abuse. Tell us a little bit, if you will, of the background of your faith and your relationship with God.
I think I came to know Jesus when I was probably 19 or 20 years old. And I had a lot of very, I think, profound experiences of God. I lived in several different countries over the course of my life. And in each of those places, I think I was able to plunge the depths of the spirituality of those countries, and I think that also has helped my faith. And so
For example, what were some of the countries you lived in?
I lived in India, I lived in Italy, I've lived in Mexico, I've lived in the United States. I'm actually Canadian. So each one of those places has a very different faith atmosphere, and I think that has really deepened my faith and made me think in a very international way. And so this program that I wrote and that I'm talking about today is already translated into 6 languages. It's available worldwide. It's something that I think is very important for all Catholics. So I've been a catechist for 44 years. I've been a psychologist for 16, so it's really a lot less time. My faith is the most important thing in my life. And so as a psychologist, I get to blend both my faith and the teaching of the Church with modern psychology, contemporary research, and there's a lot of research on what is normally called intimate partner violence. And generally speaking, people call it domestic violence. But I made that the topic of my dissertation in 1999. I've been teaching for the last whatever number of years that is, in different countries, many different countries, including Africa, where I go somewhat frequently. It's for me, it's a very important thing to, as you just finished saying, incorporate our faith into our life. It's not something separate from. It's included in every aspect, in every breath we take. And so when you look at families and since many of my patients are Catholics because they're looking for a Catholic therapist, when you see what happens in Catholic families, it's not that different from what happens in other families. And why is that? How is it that we haven't assimilated the teaching of Christ? How is it that we don't understand our gentle Master, our loving Lord, our merciful God? And how can we treat each other in the way that sometimes people do in families? And so
let me ask
that's
you
what I do.
This question. Let me ask you, how big is the problem? I threw out 90 million women have been affected by physical abuse.
Right.
Can you speak to us of the enormity of the situation? And it's not necessarily exclusively with women.
No,
There's
it's not.
also a male struggle with being abused.
Absolutely, and that's not documented in many countries. In the United States, the prevalence rate, which is how many people have been affected by a particular disease, or in this case, an issue, in their lifetime, for women, it's 32%. Who have been physically or sexually abused in their lifetime by an intimate partner, so by their spouse. 32%.
Of what?
Of American women. 28% of men in the United States have been assaulted by their partner, their spouse, in their lifetime.
Whoa.
So that's an also very huge number. But in most countries, they don't ask the men, they just ask the women. So if you look worldwide, the World Health Organization's most recent study shows that 30% of women worldwide have been affected at least once by intimate partner violence or domestic violence. So physically or sexually, we're not even talking about emotional abuse, which is so much more common. or economic abuse or other types of control, other types of abuse.
Now, you mentioned control. Tell us a little bit about, can you generalize just a little bit about saying, why is this going on?
You know, the studies that we look at that have to do with the formation of the abusive personality
Yes.
Have a lot to do with childhood attachment. So attachment to the mother, attachment to the father, but especially to the main attachment figure that's usually the mother. And a large percentage of men who are violent to their partners, and here I'm speaking about men because that's where most of the research is, a large percentage of the men who are violent to their partners have insecure attachment. So that leads to jealousy, it leads to fear of abandonment, it leads to not trusting one's partner, so not feeling that you can really rely on the other person. And this comes from childhood, from not feeling that you can really rely on your caregivers. Of course, this would be a long topic to study, but it's, so when you're looking at prevention, you really want to work on secure attachment, which is what the World Health Organization and the CDC is now trying to do. Because violence is not just in the family, we have violence everywhere. It's just out of control. And so if you work on these risk factors in childhood, they affect all violence in the future.
Getting back to the roots of the problem then.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, when you speak about risk factors, you're talking about the root causes, and therefore you want to work on those if you want to prevent. When you're working with someone who's already has the problem and is an adult, your approach is going to be a little different.
Okay, so I'm a parent, and I'm listening to what you're saying and saying, whoa, I want to make sure that my 5-year-old is not going to grow up to be an abuser.
Right, and you want to start when they're 1, not when they're 5.
Well, okay, well, yes.
You're right. Start right at the beginning.
What are some of the things that we should be doing to ensure that we go down the right road?
Well, we've come to the conclusion that we need to provide a safe, stable, and nurturing environment for children. So safe meaning they're not being exposed to violence in the home, which is one of the big risk factors. If you see your parents crossing that line, it makes it more likely that you will cross that line, either as a victim or as a perpetrator as you grow, which is why, you know, you see dating violence, you see adult partner violence. Very often these people come from violent homes, not 100% of the time. It's not like a death sentence, but it certainly makes it more common. So that's the safe part. The stable is, well, as you know, we have so many divorces, we have so much insecurity in marriage itself, or so many people are not married or not providing a family for their children where they can feel safe and stable. And so that's something we need to be concerned about is the stability of the children's home. And then we have nurturing. And nurturing is where we talk about attachment. So, you know, does that child feel safe? Is she being protected by her parents? Is he happy to see his parents? Or is he hiding behind a door because he's afraid of his parents? Are the parents available to him? Is she sure that if something bad happens to her, her parents will be there and they'll be supportive instead of blaming or criticizing or even hurting them?
Yesterday I was talking with a gentleman and he was telling me of the traumatic experiences in his life, but he came to one point, a grown man, 23 years old, and he confessed something in front of another group of people, and 2 men came up and they embraced him, and all of a sudden he said, wow, that's the first time a male had ever embraced him.
Right, yeah.
His father had never been able to do that, and leaving him with fear and insecurity. And I think it's what you're talking about, isn't it? There's this inability to be able to perhaps express loving compassion and understanding and listening.
Yeah, and part of that comes from these stereotypical rigid masculine gender roles that are so common in many countries, I think actually most countries. And so men don't grow up feeling the affection of their father, learning how to express all their feelings instead of just anger. Or, you know, they're not really supposed to show fear, they're not supposed to show sadness, you know, it's like, don't cry, you're a man, you know, even though you're 3. And so there's this pressure on young men or children to kind of go on developing this mask, this crust, this rigid facade that where they don't learn, they don't get experience of showing affection, of receiving affection, of expressing all their feelings, of learning how to express themselves without violence, of learning how to express themselves in an appropriate way, in a way that the other person can hear it. And this tends to perpetuate itself from generation to generation.
I want to talk to you. We're going to take a break right now, but I wanted to talk to you when we come back. A mystery. Why is it, let's say that there's a woman who is repeatedly the subject of abuse by her husband, and yet refuses to try to stop it, refuses to try to do something, whether it's, well, all kind of ways that it could be stopped. But let's talk. What's going on with a person being abused and refusing to do anything to make sure that it stops? When I started doing television long time ago, gosh, it's almost 30, 40 years ago, I can remember my first program. I was all excited, and I came to the end of the program, and for some reason, and honestly, I had not planned to do this, I just turned to the camera and I said, "May Jesus' love for you make you smile." Boom. And I ended. Well, for some reason, I end all of my programs with that word. I would like to convey that to you, not just on the program, but with a special gift that I want to send to you for your donation to enable us to continue to know the power of Jesus' love in your life. Look at this little magnet that you can put on your refrigerator and walk past it and allow the beauty of Jesus' love to move in your life continually. Please send in if you would, and let us know if you'd like to have this. Your donation is going to be able to help us to continue to preach the good news and to bring the love of Jesus into the lives of many, many people. Jesus loves you, and Jesus loves you with a big smile on his face that says, "I am with you forever. May Jesus' love for you always make you smile." Several women that I've talked with that are being abused, I've given them the option of getting away and doing that, and yet they don't. Many times they go back, and they go back to situations that are very abusive. Why?
That's a multi-pronged question. I'll try to answer it as quickly as I can. I teach this course at Alliant University, and my students always ask me the same question the first week. I think people are constantly baffled by this.
Yes.
And for many, many years, I worked with victims of violence. I didn't start working with abusers until 20 years ago. And there's a very different feel to it. You feel a lot more hopeful when you're working with the abuser because so many victims do go back. Now, why is that? As I said, there's many different possibilities. One is that they're from a family where violence was common, and so part of their mindset is violence is part of marriage. And this is just what I have to go through. It's what my mother went through. Maybe my grandmother did. It's just what women go through.
This is what happens.
Yeah, and so it's normalized in their mind. It's not something that is scandalous to them, and often they just think there's no way out. So that's one possibility. The other possibility is, of course, financial. How am I going to support my family, especially if there's children? If there's children, I think it changes everything.
Yes.
When it's just you and your partner, you're like, okay, you're beating me up, I'm out of here. But when you have children involved, which is, of course, what usually happens, that changes everything. Then you don't want your child to grow up without a father. You don't think you have enough money to raise the child, and et cetera, et cetera. Then there's also the possibility that you're afraid to leave. And there's different kinds of abusers.
Yeah,
there's some abusers that are actually going to be very dangerous if you try to leave them. In fact, women are at most danger. They're in the most danger when they leave their partner. And most of the time when we hear about a murder-suicide, which we hear about
Yes.
all the time, unfortunately, here as well as in other countries, it's she left him, she might have another partner, she might not, but she's clearly not with him. He feels so threatened by that because of the insecure attachment and the pathological jealousy. So he decides, I can't live without you, and you can't be with someone else, so I'm going to take you out, and then I'll take myself out.
Wow.
And this is, this is a real risk. It's not a fake risk. And of course, it depends who you're with. So I mean, perhaps the person who's being abusive to you doesn't have that personality. Then you're not at that kind of risk. but you'd better know before you decide to leave, right?
Oftentimes, they feel that this is what they deserve because of deep feelings of guilt and negative images of themselves.
Yes.
And I, as a priest, am continually trying to say, hey, wait a minute, you don't deserve this.
That's pretty frustrating, isn't it?
Can you hear what I'm saying?
Oh, I've been through it a million times, yeah.
They're
Absolutely.
overwhelmed with their sinfulness, their brokenness, and that's fed by the
Of course.
words that the abuser gives to them,
Right.
along with the physical things that happen.
Right. So that might be what we call a premorbid condition prior to marriage. Perhaps they grew up in a family
Sure.
like that where
Yeah,
they don't
yeah.
have any self-esteem to start with.
Yeah.
Or it might have been something that has been eroding, minute by minute, week by week, year by year, as they live with this person who is constantly putting them down.
Yeah.
It can be either or both. And so, yes, it is very true that when you work with a victim of domestic violence who has already left the partner, and that does happen, I have lots of those patients, it takes years to help them to build up their
Let 'em go.
self-esteem. It really does. It's a very long process.
One of the questions that I have also is, we try to follow Jesus and we try to do what Jesus
Yes.
says. And in the 5th chapter of Matthew, he says some very strong things about turning the other cheek, going the extra mile. And I'm wondering if that kind of stark statement from Jesus can be the justification of a person wanting to continue to suffer these kind of things, because I'm gonna turn the other cheek and believe that that's the way I'm going to change him or change the person that's the abuser.
I don't think people usually quote that particular quotation. What I hear more often is that God has joined us and no one shall pull us asunder.
Yes.
So,
Oh, yeah.
the indissolubility of
the
marriage,
marriage,
and this is something that people are very aware of. It's being drilled into their heads, especially if they're Catholic. And so when you're working with a Catholic spouse who is in this situation, you really have to help them to understand. And of course, the Church has been more helpful in this regard in the last 15, 20 years than in the past.
Yes.
So now that's, violence in a relationship can be grounds for an annulment.
Yes.
The U.S. bishops have come out very clearly saying you don't have to stay in an abusive relationship. You can seek separation. They even mentioned the word divorce. I mean, so
Yes.
it's not like
Yes.
you're locked in there. But of course, in many cultures, and I have worked in many countries with Catholic people, bishops haven't said that, and they haven't heard that it's okay to leave your partner if he's beating you up or if he's putting your life in danger and your children's lives in this miserable condition that you live in. They haven't heard that. And priests don't talk about it. I honestly think that many bishops don't want to talk about it because their tribunals would be flooded with people trying to get an annulment.
Yes,
This
I
is a
got you.
very common problem. And so people, they have the belief that I married this person, I have to stay with them until the day that I die. That's being reinforced by the Church, and it's being reinforced by their mothers, by their grandmothers, by their family. Everybody that they meet is telling them the same thing.
Well, I just want to make sure that we're very clear that that was not the intent of Jesus. That if a woman is being abused by her husband, physically abused by her husband, emotionally abused by her husband, Jesus isn't coming and saying, "Oh, just let it happen. Turn your cheek this way, that way, this way." That is not the teaching of Jesus. To stand up for the respect that we need for each person, and to let go of that feeling of I'm worthy of this because this is what a Christian does.
Yeah, it's very hard to sync that belief with everything that we're hearing about human dignity and human rights and women's rights, which is coming from the Vatican right now. We just got a wonderful document from the Holy Father, and in this book that I wrote, I answer the question, if you're a priest or you're a sister, is it good to tell someone, forgive and forget? Is it good to tell someone, this is your cross, you just have to carry it? And how else might you respond in a way that is not so devastating for someone? Because that sounds like a death sentence to somebody. And sometimes it is a death sentence.
A young girl has just fallen in love with a young man, and she thinks this is the man of my dreams,
Right.
and I want to get married and move ahead. Is there anything that you would say to them as to saying there might be some indications of certain attitudes or actions that would give her a red flag that was saying, maybe 2 months into this marriage, I'm going to find out that I'm marrying a different person than I expected.
Perhaps I need to think about this a little more, right? Yes, I think that there are several indications. They're not fail-proof. So sometimes a person who really wants you for whatever reason can disguise themselves
Yes, yes.
and mask some of their negative tendencies. But I would be looking at, as you mentioned very perfectly, attitudes and actions. So, you know, is this person somebody who approves of violence? Is this person who has a negative attitude towards women? Which it's going to be really hard to hide that all the time.
Probably an indication that I've often been jumping what you're saying. What's his attitude towards his mother?
Right, that's another good one. And if he hates his mother, if he has a really bad relationship with his mother, that can be a red flag as well. Because then maybe he's generalized that to all women, including you.
Yes.
And so that could be a very difficult situation to be in. So there's that. Attitudes, you know, attitude towards violence, towards women. I'd say that anybody who has a very rigid attitude towards life in general, that can be a red flag. That, you know, there's just no gray area at all. It's just black and white, because that person's going to justify his or her behavior based on those beliefs. Then we have actions, and I would look at words. You know, what kind of words does this person address to you? I mean, you know, is there an F word every couple of seconds? Is there, you know, a lot of insult going on? And I mean, like most people would identify that as verbal abuse, and they'd say, I don't want to be with this person. But then there's people who wouldn't, because maybe they grew up with that. Or maybe that's the subculture they hang in, and so that seems normal to them. But you really need to be concerned with how a person speaks to you. There's no physical violence or even sexual violence without some sort of emotional abuse accompanying it or preceding it. And so you don't expect someone to just, out of the blue, start beating you up. There's going to be a build-up to it. And most of the time, that's some sort of emotional or verbal abuse or psychological mind games. And so you need to be aware of that and really be on the watch for, you know, is this the person I want to spend my life with, who's constantly putting me down, or who puts everyone else down all the time, and who is profane, you know, 90% of the time? Is this the person I want to be raising my children with? I think these are good questions. Then we have the actions. So is this person who punches a hole in the wall because he gets upset? And this, of course, could be a woman. I have a patient right now who punches holes in walls. Wow. So this is not just guys. Is this someone who gets angry and throws things? Or, you know, does this with everything on the table? So is this someone who appears to have what we call a lack of impulse control, right? I mean, they're a little out of control, or maybe even a lot out of control. Are they somebody who's been involved in crime in the past? Because there's a pretty good correlation between crime and domestic violence as well. So, you know, you want to look at the whole spectrum of what this person presents to you and try to make, and I mean, this is ridiculous, and it sounds like foolishness. You know, you're 19 or you're 18 and you're in love. Try to make an educated decision about what your life might look like, you know, a year from now or 2 years from now, if you in fact decide to tie the knot with this person or just live with this person, which is much more common.
You experience a fear, bridging some question or making a comment about something to happen. Am I afraid to do that?
Yeah.
That's a kind of a good indication if you can get in touch with yourselves as to where that's going.
It's actually really good that you bring that up, because that is the number one question that I ask my patients when they come in with problems of violence in their family. Are you afraid of him? Or are you afraid of her? It's mostly, are you afraid of him? In that situation, that tells me a whole lot about how severe it is. It tells me a whole lot about how much probability there is that we're going to be able to help them.
Yeah. Please, stay tuned. We want to pray with you. Listen to this message, please. When I started doing television a long time ago, gosh, it's almost 30, 40 years ago, I can remember my first program. I was all excited, and I came to the end of the program, and for some reason, and honestly, I had not planned to do this, I just turned to the camera and I said, "May Jesus' love for you make you smile." Boom. And I ended. Well, for some reason, I end all of my programs with that word. I would like to convey that to you, not just on the program, but with a special gift that I want to send to you for your donation to enable us to continue to know the power of Jesus' love in your life. Look at this little magnet that you can put on your refrigerator and walk past it and allow the beauty of Jesus' love to move in your life continually. Please send in if you would, and let us know if you'd like to have this. Your donation is going to be able to help us to continue to preach the good news and to bring the love of Jesus into the lives of many, many people. Jesus loves you, and Jesus loves you with a big smile on his face that says, I am with you forever. May Jesus' love for you always make you smile. How can we help to end violence in Catholic families? And it's for clergy, religious, and laity, for everyone. You've done a lot of research on this, haven't you? This isn't just falling off the log.
No, that's the fruit of many years of research, but it's a very simple book. It's written for the public. It's not written to be complicated or difficult to understand. So it's basically, how do we respond pastorally as religious, as clergy, as laity, when somebody comes to us with this problem? So there's that section of it. And then there's a section on, what does the church teach about marriage? What does Christ teach about marriage? What should a Catholic family look like?
Right in line with Pope Francis and his concern.
And
yes.
I quote him several times in that. And then there's a section, of course, on stats and theories and all those things you need to know about domestic violence to be able to approach the problem effectively. But then there's a section at the back, which is about if you're a husband and father, if you're a mother and wife, how do you help yourself? How do you help someone else? How do you actually avoid some of these problems in your family? Good. So it's very brief, but it gets to quite a lot of points.
Listen, we want to pray for the people that call in. We have a web page, and we're going to make sure that your web page is part of our web page so that we can everything because people are going to want to talk with you.
Okay.
But they get in touch with us with their needs and their cares. Here's a request for cure of physical, mental, and emotional problems from Florida, Lily. From New York, Susan. Breaking an addiction.
We didn't talk about that.
From Texas, we got Anita praying for health for a dear friend, like this. And then here's from Utah, pray for herself as to do God's will. Let's just pray for these people and pray for you as you've listened to this program and you've listened to the sharing. Can God speak to you of the freedom and the life that maybe there is some abuse going on and the statistics are high? You're probably not alone. And realizing that you can have the freedom and you can have the forgiveness and the acceptance of God. Lord, bless these people and bless all of those that are at home with your love and your peace. And may Jesus' love for you always make you smile.